Today on Locked On Canadians, are we as a fan base a little bit too high strung? We're going to discuss this as the developments in Pierre-Luc Dubois' dossier take place, and is that discourse over? Plus, there's some fallout from the Matthew Tkachuk trade to the Florida Panthers, and it is said that Jonathan Huberdeau is not happy. Is Montreal his next destination? We're going to talk about all of this and more on today's Locked On Canadians.
Your Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to episode 663 of Locked On Canadiens. We'd like to thank BetOnline for today's episode. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. My name is Laura Saba, also known as The Active Stick, and I'm joined, as always, by my wonderful co-host, Scott Matla of Habs Eyes on the Prize. And Scott, it is warm right now. Are Montreal Canadiens fans right now wound a little too tightly?
I thought you were about to ask if Montreal Canadiens fans are okay, and I was like, Laura, we know the answer to this, and the answer is no. We love you all dearly. And
we're also Canadiens fans too.
Yes, like across the board, I think everyone is very desperate for anything at this point. Ask poor Mike Matheson, who despite having a very cute reveal in the locker room at the Bell Center and everything, oh man, was that not a it did exactly what it meant to. The entire hockey world went, the Habs are about to do something, and it was, hi, I'm Mike Matheson. I'm taking over the Twitter account at 8 p.m. on a Friday, in which there's been no news. But that is not fully what we are talking about, because earlier this week, what was it, Thursday? Or was it earlier on Friday? I can't truly remember.
So it's all blending together. What happened? Let's just talk real quick. Like, the Montreal Canadiens tweeted, if you've missed this, they've tweeted, guess who? And then devinez c'est qui in French, obviously. And everybody was like, they're going to announce a signing. They're going to announce Nick Suzuki as a new captain. They're going to announce a trade. It was 8 p.m. on, I think it was Saturday at this point. It was and everybody was in a frenzy. And it turned out it was just Mike Matheson taking over the Twitter and also bringing his extremely adorable young child to the Canadiens locker room. And that was really, really cute. But Montreal Canadiens fans so starved for big news, particularly since a big trade went on the night before. I think we're wound up a little too tightly, and this kind of became evident in the fact that I believe it was on Friday, the Canadiens announced new numbers for their players, and Juraj Slafkovsky. Again, the first time I pronounce it, it is incorrect.
We're going to release a shirt that has you trying to pronounce Slafkovsky with a dash through it and then his actual name underneath it and sell it as merch.
4 or 5 of them, essentially. Locked On Canadiens.
If anyone wants to design this shirt for us, please let us know.
Exactly. All the ways that I've pronounced it. Slafkovsky, Yuri, all of those things. Anyway, Uri, if you're out there, I'm so sorry. I'm trying my best and I will get it. But essentially, he's always gone with the number 20, I believe. That is his number. And he wanted it. And Chris Wideman was previously wearing this number and he gave it to him. And so this was a big deal, except Montreal Canadiens fans are a little bit upset about the number that Chris Wideman ended up selecting.
I have two thoughts. One, in an interview, Slafkovsky said he wanted to wear 18, which the older portion of the Habs fan base took personally in that, there's no sense of honor. It's like, 18's retired. It's like, the kid's been here for 3 seconds, guys.
He also did say it wasn't available.
Yeah. If he didn't know why, okay, guess what? The Habs have retired 75 numbers. It's fine. I forget which numbers are retired sometimes, and I've been covering this team nonstop for the last decade. So Wideman switches from number 20 to number 6, which a lot of people think that it's too soon after Shea Weber was traded to Vegas for Evgeny Dodonov, who is now wearing number 63. Kirby Dach is wearing number 77, just to kind of get those out of the way here. And my first thought with this is number 6 didn't get worn at all last year. And the person who wore number 6 before Shea Weber was Douglas Murray. So like it's fine. I get why some people think it might be too soon. When Scott Gomez was traded to Montreal, originally he wanted to wear 11, and it was just after Saku Koivu had left. He wore 91 for, I think, 2 seasons and then switched to 11. Brendan Gallagher came in and wore 73, and then he switched to 11, and, no one made a fuss about that, this or that or anything. We say it a lot. It's not that deep. I get why some people think it might be too soon given everything going on, but if you want to start that fresh chapter in here, you got to rip that Band-Aid off and you just kind of start over again here. I admire a lot of what Shea Weber did, and I think he was a fine captain of the Montreal Canadiens, but after the Stanley Cup playoffs ended in 2021, that chapter closed. Like, it was, Weber's not playing again. It's not like he's going to be suiting up for Vegas wearing number 6 opposite Chris Wideman on a given night. I get why some people think it's too soon, but it's really not. Saku Koivu was one of the I think is the longest tenured captain in Canadiens history, or tied for longest tenured captain in Canadiens history. That makes a little bit of a difference. Weber, was here for a couple of seasons as captain and then didn't play at all last year. I don't think there's any malicious intent, and it's just not that deep. It's really, really not that deep. That's really all I've got for that.
I'm a little bit confused because a lot of people thought, when he was traded, it's so weird the way this whole thing shook out. At the end of the season, there was so much criticism of him. And then after he was traded, it was like, well, he wasn't all that dedicated and he didn't really care about being here anyway. He wasn't such a dedicated captain. It's good riddance and things like that. And I don't understand where we're supposed to stand on Shea Weber, like, on the one hand, we're supposed to revere him enough to not let Chris Wideman take his number a whole entire season later when he's on another team. It's not like he's like still retired in Montreal or still on LTIR in Montreal and we're taking his number away. So I'm not sure. I don't get it. Like sometimes I see fans saying that he was a terrible captain or he just didn't care enough. And then I see people being like he was too dedicated and we're being too hard on him when he was playing injured. So I'm not really sure what the canon is supposed to be on Shea Weber. To my mind, it was not a situation that he chose, that he actually rose up to the situation. He was given the captaincy for a reason. His teammates respected him enough for that. And, I don't necessarily think that Chris Wideman needs to have any loyalty to Shea Weber. That's not what I think at all. I appreciate what he did in Montreal, but to me, he's not going to mean the same as a Saku Koivu. Even Brian Gionta is not going to mean the same as a Saku Koivu. Max Pacioretty, as much as I love him, and I really do, is not going to mean the same as a Saku Koivu, right? Like, these are different people. We're in a different era. I understand people who care about Shea Weber who think that this is too soon for them, and I absolutely validate that, but I don't understand why we're supposed to get upset at every little thing. I mean, you look at our comments sometimes and people just getting angry with us for having opinions, and I think it's not just Montreal that's seeing this. Like, we talk to a bunch of journalists and podcast hosts and things like that. Like, all the fan bases are really, really high strung. And I just want to remind everybody to take a deep breath. Like, what we do is we watch a bunch of people push around a little rubber thingy on knife shoes, right? That's what we do. And this is, it's not that deep. I think we should appreciate the players that we love. I think we shouldn't allow these players to get away with, we're talking about the stuff that's going on in the news. We shouldn't let them get away with anything. We should hold them to high standards. But I think it's fine that Chris Wideman took somebody else's number in order to give a future superstar of this team, at least in our minds, at least in the prediction, at least where his draft position was, the opportunity to take the number that he desires. I think that it's not that deep. But in the meantime, another thing that I don't know how deep it is the Pierre-Luc Dubois one-year qualifying offer contract that he signed with the Winnipeg Jets. How does this affect the Montreal Canadiens fan base's desire to get him or lack thereof? That's all coming up in just one moment. But first, betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from the live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action that's happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so another thing that took place after our last episode was Pierre-Luc Dubois signed his 1-year, $6 million qualifying offer with the Winnipeg Jets. This had a lot of Canadiens fans being like, all right, this is, we're going to get him afterwards when he's a UFA after 2 years or whatever. This signifies his desire to just get this over with. That doesn't necessarily mean that he wants to play in Winnipeg. And then a lot of people are like, this is the dossier that's closed. That doesn't mean he's coming here. I think something that's really important to note is that just because a player has indicated a desire to play for Montreal, 1, does not make him a fit for Montreal, but 2, does not make this a sure thing from happening. Now, Kent Hughes did say that he was looking for top-end caliber, large centermen. Like, that's not a secret, right? And yes, in an ideal world, when you have Nick Suzuki, Kirby Dach, and Pierre-Luc Dubois as your center depth, that's amazing. But I think that things have to align in such a way that it's beneficial for both teams. And if the player's lucky at the RFA stage, he gets some control over what he does. He's not a UFA. He hasn't played the amount of games that it takes or the number of years that it takes for you to become a UFA, right? UFAs have their destiny in their own hands. He does not. And you can, like Matthew Tkachuk, kind of force the team's hand, and we're going to talk about that later. But in my mind, the Pierre-Luc Dubois signing a qualifying offer doesn't change anything for the Montreal Canadiens at this point. They've got centermen. They're in a rebuild. They need to have a couple more years of high draft picks and good drafts and good development before they can be a team to contend with. So for me, I'm not too worried about this. And I think the longer this has dragged on, we were talking a little bit about how high-strung we are. The longer this has dragged on, the more polarizing it has become. There's been a group of people saying that he's what this team needs and it would be great to have him in Montreal. And I feel like the longer it's taken, the more people have turned on him and said, we don't need that kind of attitude in Montreal. He's forced to trade or been pouty at both teams he's been on. We don't really know what's going on in that locker room, and we don't know exactly what he said. We just know what the reporting has been, which has been that he did believe that he was going to be traded to Montreal, and his agent has said that Montreal is a place that he would like to play. Montreal could have been any one of a number of teams that he would like to play for. And we don't know what's going on in Winnipeg, but we can't, people are saying he's the cancer in the locker room. We don't know that. Like, we can't determine that. We are not there. So it does seem pretty clear that he wants to be elsewhere, but the fact that he signed the qualifying offer to me means that either he's decided that he's going to make the most of the situation and make himself so attractive to other teams that they'll give up assets for him, or he's going to continue a sort of semi-holdout in which he has signed the contract, but he's not going to play very well. Kind of like he did in Columbus, but we also have to remember that the coach in Columbus was John Tortorella at the time, and we don't really know what that dynamic was like. So, sorry, go on, Scott. I've just been rambling a lot. I feel like in this case, like the story's not closed. It's just postponed for now.
It's very strange in that him signing a deal it's 1 year, $6 million. And he did this in Columbus, and we see how that went. And would not be shocked if things turn around and it's just like, okay, he's still getting traded here on this 1 year deal, and Montreal, he's your problem at the end of all this. But at the same time, it's a saga that seems very destined to end in one way, that he's going to leave Winnipeg regardless at some point here. And if he doesn't come to Montreal this year, that's fine, because the Canadiens are trying to be bad this season still. I don't think they're going to be as bad as either Philadelphia or Chicago or whatnot. They're still not going to be great, and they want to see what they've got in Kirby Dach. And if Kirby Dach ends up being good, you have a younger version of Pierre-Luc Dubois, big body, offensive instincts, and all these other things. The question for me is, where does it leave Christian Dvorak in all of this? Because he seems to be just this kind of guy floating in the ether that he's here, but we don't know for how much longer. And this whole saga is, I get people why he's like, he doesn't want to be there, he doesn't want to be here. The stories that Laura and I have heard, offhand about not only, Winnipeg's locker room right now, which has spilled into the news, that Blake Wheeler's, a bully, and, Mark Scheifele and all these other guys. Something's not right in Winnipeg, and it's an underrated kind of storyline going into the season, that the Jets are kind of a mess and are on that precipice of where the Canadiens were under Michel Therrien before Claude Julien got here, and that they're potentially teetering towards being very bad if their all-world goalie stops being all-world all of the time. And if you're Pierre-Luc Dubois, why would you want to stay there? Yes, you have family who work with the Moose, the AHL affiliate, but that only goes so far when you're around a team that's losing, with attitudes in the locker room you don't like. And I say this in the nicest way, we have friends in Winnipeg and everything. Winnipeg in winter cannot be a pleasant experience across the board. And it's cold, it's dark, there's not an airport, and you have to share a locker room with unpleasant people. So like you said, the story's far from over. We don't know where the endpoint of this story is, but I feel like the Pierre-Luc Dubois to Montreal thing is kind of at least on hold right now. It's a background download right now, and it'll eventually pick up steam at some point. The minute he's like slightly grumpy on the bench, all these stories are going to come back again, like they always do. So I guess we'll wait and see.
I absolutely agree with you, Scott, and I just wanted to shout out a couple of listeners, Jack L. and Patrick L., who both talked about Christian Dvorak staying and the desire to keep him on for a little while longer at least. And they cited his excellence at taking faceoffs, not just the fact that he's a useful player, which we already knew, particularly under Martin St. Louis, but he talked about, the Canadiens have been criticized for their faceoffs, particularly Nick Suzuki, so they need somebody that's good on that front, and especially for now, before they move on to the future plans of this team, it's not a bad idea to keep him on for a couple of for at least this season, maybe a couple of months, maybe until the deadline. We'll see. When I said at least the season, I meant at least the start of the season. In the meantime, I am going to turn our attention to Jonathan Huberdeau, because obviously over the weekend a giant blockbuster trade took place. Matthew Tkachuk was traded to Florida Panthers. We've got a lot of opinions on that, and we're going to talk about how this affects the Canadiens in just one moment. All right, folks, let's talk about that big trade. There's so many layers to it, but I really want to focus on the Montreal Canadiens aspect of it, particularly because obviously the Canadiens were never a contender for Matthew Tkachuk. We talked about it in our last episode. He wanted to go to either St. Louis or a team in a city and a state that had no sales tax, and not only that, he cashed in big. He has a contract that is $1 million per year, and all the rest of it is in bonuses, and apparently that makes it almost escrow. It minimizes his escrow hit. I'm not 100% sure on this. I need to confirm, but that's what I have been seeing. Also, it makes him buyout proof. And Matthew Tkachuk is now a Florida Panther, and people criticize Florida for sending the Flames what looks like a lot, right? Like Mackenzie Weegar, Jonathan Huberdeau, both on expiring contracts this year, and then
a conditional first-round pick in 2020. They don't have a first-round pick next year, the year after, or the year after that. And
right.
I look at this trade because people at work ask me about this too, and they're like, what do you think? I'm like, I don't know, because Matthew Tkachuk is an incredible player. He's a 115-point player. Like, he plays with an edge. He scores high-skill goals. He mixes it up. He's a unicorn, as people have described him. And the Atlantic is going to be just a terror next year with both Tkachuks there. Dear God, is it going to be a mess? But Florida then gave up their second leading forward in terms of time on ice in Jonathan Huberdeau, and their second leading defender in terms of time on ice in Mackenzie Weegar, and a first-round pick. They are banking on winning immediately with this trade. If they don't, it's bad. Like, it's going to blow up in their face because they don't have a first-round pick until 2026. You can't have that in a modern league here because you have to draft and develop people. Look at Vegas and how they've struggled. Yeah, they're good, but there's no prospects in that system there at all right now. And apparently, the biggest thing I think out of all of this is that Jonathan Huberdeau isn't super happy with the way things went down apparently they were supposed to sit down and hash out terms towards an extension in Florida. Very clearly, he was happy to be in Florida. He was a first overall pick in, what was that, 2011, I think. And then nothing happened. Next thing you know, he got traded. And I think that's not a good sign of your Calgary. It's a great return, and if they can sell Huberdeau and Uyghur on staying, they make out like bandits on this, because Uyghur's an underrated defenseman. I think Jonathan Huberdeau is fantastic. But it's a weird trade that it could go very badly for both sides involved by the end of everything. I don't think it's going to. It could be win-win or lose-lose. Who knows? All I know is when was the last time we saw a trade like truly actually like this big in terms of scale? And I know someone's going to remind me immediately, but I'm going to forget anyways.
I mean, it is a pretty big deal, and I just want to really apologize to our listeners for the audio issues that we are having currently. I know there's a little bit of a background noise on my end, and I apologize for that. I want to just sort of talk about Jonathan Huberdeau for a second, because we made jokes about this, right? Like, we talked about Florida spending so far close to their cap that they weren't going to be able to keep him. They weren't going to be able to re-sign him. They were going to be forced to either trade him at the deadline or allow him to walk in free agency, and Montreal could swoop in on that. I think that Jonathan Huberdeau is a phenomenal player. He's not a centerpiece, but he had an amazing year this year. I think that he's one of those players that is good enough where you say, that's a guy with a lot of talent on a stacked team. And Montreal is in the process of trying to get stacked. I don't think that Montreal should be in a hurry to even inquire about Huberdeau. And again, we're hearing that he's not happy about the way things went down. He was under the assumption that Florida was going to open contract talks, and instead of opening the contract talks, he found himself traded, right? I mean, that's very well how it could have happened. And I feel like it's one of those examples where, in most of our everyday lives, employers have no loyalty to you, right? And that's pretty much what happened in this case. It's just that when it's a hockey player, it just seems a little bit different. It looks a little bit jarring. I think that the Montreal Canadiens should forget all about Pierre-Luc Dubois and should sit around and wait on Jonathan Huberdeau, because what's likely to happen is if the Flames start strong, and in November, they still look like a team in their division that could make the playoffs, they're not going to do anything. But if they flounder, Jonathan Huberdeau is going to be available at the deadline for the highest bidder. We can let that happen. What's going on?
No, nothing's going on. I just you know how I was trying to remember when Jonathan Huberdeau was drafted. I didn't realize that he will be 30 going into next year's free agency. And if you're the Canadiens, I think that is a blinking light where, hey, they want to cash in now. This is going to be a big one last score kind of contract. And if I'm Kent Hughes, I don't know if this team's in a place to afford that, because Caulfield's got to get paid. If Kirby Dach comes good, you're going to have to pay Kirby Dach. You're going to have to pay. There's a lot of guys who need to get paid and a lot of players who are going to be leaving. I'm not opposed to getting Jonathan Huberdeau for the Montreal Canadiens. He's a winger. They have a lot of those, which means before they can even think about acquiring him, they got to shed some of this here and make it work. He's a phenomenal player. I'm looking at his numbers here, just under a point per game. And then he slowly started to pick it up as the Panthers got good. An incredibly talented player. 115 points. Now, my question is, though, coming off a career year and likely going to have another big year in Calgary this year, are they paying for previous performances, not future performances? The Carey Price conundrum here. And I think Huberdeau's fantastic. This is not a shot at him. I don't know if he fits the timeline for what the Canadiens want to do, unless he's coming in on his last little bit of a contract and goes, I want to win a cup here in Montreal. And then you try and make it work. I'm very worried about what he's going to ask for given his recent performances, and that's what he's going to get banked off for pay. So
I think the thing is, you changed my mind on all of this, because I think that he does belong on a team that's ready to contend and on a stacked team. Montreal's a few years away from that. I just didn't realize that he is 30 years old or coming up to 30 years old. I think this is something that is a huge red flag, as you mentioned, and the Canadiens should really be trying to acquire pieces that are young and that are ready to be part of the team's future. However, let's say 3 or 4 years from now, the Canadiens are gearing up for a playoff run. I'm not saying Stanley Cup run, I'm saying a playoff run, a decent playoff run, and it's not working out on whatever team he's at. You do have the opportunity to trade for him if there's salary retention in the process. But I think these are all pipe dreams. I just want to remind everybody, like, we are in the off season, like the Canadiens are in the midst of a massive amount of shifts. And I understand everybody being upset about certain things or being stressed out about certain things. But at the end of the day, we're watching a hockey team. It's not that deep. You don't need to be yelling at each other. You don't need to be yelling, you don't need to be allowing this team to cause you stress. Have fun with sports. This is going to be it's been a fun off season so far, and it's going to continue to be a fun off season for us. And we have something very, very special planned for you for our next episode. So please make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Canadiens. You can also find me on Twitter at The Active Stick. You'll find Scott at Scott Matla. You can also email us at lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. Remember, there is a zero tolerance policy for being mean to anybody in our comments, including ourselves. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you tomorrow.